There are places on this earth where time forgets to move forward, where wind howls through shattered doorways and stone walls crumble under centuries of silence. These places don't just fade, they vanish. Not in flames or war, but in stillness, as though something removed them. Villages that once thrived with life, laughter, routine suddenly empty. No final goodbye. No survivors to tell the tale. Only remnants of a presence, questions too uncomfortable for the official record. One such village lies buried beneath the gentle, rolling hills of North Yorkshire, Wareham Percy. To the passing eye, it's nothing more than moss-covered ruins low, walls etched with age, the fractured bones of a once-breathing community. But look closer, and you'll find that Wareham Percy doesn't just hold the story of plague and famine, it holds something deeper. A silence too loud, a disappearance to total, and bones, ... Bones that shouldn't be there, centuries before. The term pandemic was coined long before science could name a virus. Something swept through medieval Europe. It was invisible, unstoppable. It bled through cities, monasteries, and farmland with equal hunger. They called it the pestilence. But the Black Death was more than a disease, it was a reckoning. It exposed the fragility of power, the limits of knowledge, and the terrifying fact that even faith could not shield you from the unknown. In 1348, plague arrived on England's southern coast. By the time it reached Wareham Percy, records were already vanishing. Monks who had copied manuscripts for generations left pages half-finished. Trade routes collapsed. Fields rotted with unharvested grain. But Wareham Percy's end wasn't merely about death, it was about erasure. Because here's where the story. Fractures excavations led by archaeologists in the late 20th century unearthed something peculiar in the remains of this village. Human bones, over 130 individuals buried not in the usual Christian manner, but mutilated and scattered. Cut marks on vertebrae, signs of deliberate decapitation and burning. This was no simple graveyard. These were signs of fear, ritual, desperation. Something happened here that terrified the survivors into forgetting. And that's the problem. According to surviving records, Wareham Percy was abandoned due to economic decline, landowners shifting to sheep farming, driving out the peasant class. A tidy explanation, a digestible one. But bones don't lie. These people weren't relocated, they were erased. And perhaps not by choice, zoom out and we see a pattern. All across medieval Europe, villages like Wareham Percy, the landscape places like Hound Tor in Devon or Gainsthorpe in Lincolnshire. It's forgotten towns that vanish without ceremony. Each with its own legend, each sitting on ley lines, each shrouded in the same eerie absence of finality. And each with ruins that whisper a similar story. They were afraid of something beyond. Plague or famine? Consider the case of often hailed as the plague village of England. In 1665, when the Black Death arrived in this remote Derbyshire settlement, the villagers made a decision no modern mind could fathom. They locked themselves in, voluntarily. No one entered. No one left. Over 260 people died. Entire families perished, but the village contained the disease, something else. There are accounts barely preserved of strange lights in the woods during those months, of voices heard through the fog, stone circles nearby that grew warm to the touch. These are dismissed today as folklore. But every piece of folklore begins as memory, twisted by time. What were they really protecting? Step further back. Imagine the plague not merely as a biological crisis, but as a historical filter-an event that didn't just decimate populations, but allowed for the erasure of inconvenient knowledge. Manuscripts lost, healers burned, technologies buried. Aham, Wareham, Percy, and their ilk weren't just victims of disease. They may have been silenced, because the real threat to official history isn't death, it's what the dead might have known. For instance, medieval Europe was not the intellectual wasteland we often imagine. In the libraries of the Moors in Spain, ancient Greek, Roman, Persian, and even Indian scientific texts were preserved. In monasteries across Ireland and Scotland, Monks copied diagrams that hint at forgotten engines, astronomical codes and ancient Greek, Roman, Persian, and even Indian scientific. Texts were preserved. Monasteries across Ire. Mathematical models not seen again until the Enlightenment. And then, silence. In the decades following the plague, thousands of these documents disappeared. Entire monastic libraries were lost to fire, but some say the fires were no accident. Some believe a quiet war was waged not with swords or armies, but with ink and omission. The plague gave cover for a purge of ideas, of unapproved knowledge, people who asked the wrong questions. And here's where Warren Percy may become the key, among the buried ruins. Fragments of text have been recovered charred, incomplete, and written in an unidentifiable cipher, a language no known civilization has recorded. One fragment contains a symbol repeated 3 times in Ouroboros, encircling a cube. Historians dismiss it as monastic ornamentation. But elsewherein, manuscripts smuggled from Alexandria and pre-Islamic texts from Damascus and on petroglyphs. In the Americas, that same symbol appears. It's always connected to portals, gateways, rebirth, and Recursion. Why was it in a Yorkshire village? What did they find beneath the chapel or in the surrounding fields that caused not just their destruction, but their deletion? Today the village lies open to the wind. Tourists pass through, sheep graze where children once played, but beneath the soil, a deeper history pulses. A warning, a riddle, perhaps even a map. The plague came for many villages, but Warren Percy, something else came for it. In every forgotten ruin, there is a threshold, a place where history ends and something older begins. Warren Percy was never just a village, it was a vessel. And when that vessel cracked, thunder, plague, pressure, or something else what spilled, out wasn't merely death, but memory. Memory older than the written word, knowledge our ancestors buried or were forced to forget. In the heart of the ruined village, just beneath the church foundations, excavators found a shallow tunnel, sealed with sandstone and lined with scorched timber. Official reports labeled it a storage chamber, but its shape was wrong, too narrow to walk, too deep to crawl, and at the far end, a single stone slab, etched with concentric circles and alchemical glyphs, some strikingly similar to pre-Druidic. Markings found in Orkney and Brittany, it wasn't storage, it was containment. In 2007, a retired academic named Dr. Marion Halberd released a private paper never published in journals, but passed quietly among independent researchers. In it, she proposed that Warren Percy's tunnel was not medieval at all, but repurposed, that the village had been built atop something far older. A convergence point, a site of pre-human activity, as she cautiously phrased it. Halberd traced matching glyphs to Anatolia, to the ruins of Göbekli Tepe 10,000 years old, predating agriculture itself. Her thesis was dismissed as speculative fantasy, but the pattern deepens. In the margins of a 14th century Flemish chronicle, a monk named Corvain de Tirum wrote of a sickness of the soul that descended upon villages in the north. Not a pestilence of the flesh, he claimed, but of memory. Entire families forgetting each other. Children speaking languages never taught. Priests seeing visions of golden machines turning under stone. References a town ever named, directly where the church bell rang 3 days after the last priest died. Then his entry stopped. Centuries later, nearby in Yorkshire, a local legend survives the tale of the hollow year. Villagers spoke of a single harvest season when time moved wrong. Crops bloomed overnight and withered by morning. Shadows shifted in the wrong direction. Livestock wandered into the woods and came back, silent, not dead, just empty, eyes open, but vacant. Every retelling ends the same way. The people left everything behind. Clothes on the line, bread in the oven, tools still warm. Sound familiar? These stories are not random. They form an echo one that reverberates through suppressed history. Some researchers have long suspected that the medieval world was not as disconnected as we believe. That ancient trade routes brought not just spices and silk but ideas, technologies, languages, even artifacts. A 12th century Arabic manuscript from Al-Andalus describes northern monks who carried stone eggs that hummed. In a monastery near Lake Ohrid, speaks of metal tomes given to Templar knights by Greek sages' books that required no ink. And then, silence. These manuscripts vanish, or authors disappear. Monasteries where they were kept are burned, or dissolved under later regimes. It's a recurring theme in our history. Knowledge arriving too early. Met with fire. Now let's return to Warham Percy. After the final abandonment, the land was sold to various landowners, but no one ever built directly on the ruins. Locals refused to live there.
When asked why, they'd often mutter the
ground remembers. Even today, aerial thermal imaging over the site reveals unexplained heat signatures beneath the chapel ruins, consistent with shallow chambers or structures, but ones that don't show up on radar, or something below that refuses to cool. This phenomenon isn't unique. In southern France, beneath the ruined village of Rocamadour, researchers recently uncovered an underground network of tunnels, etched with magnetic alloys and traceable to any medieval metallurgy. The layout, identical to Crop Circle. Formations seen in Wiltshire in 1998. It's as though different cultures across time were accessing the same blueprint. But from where? Some propose the existence of an ancient Sorsa network of pre-civilizational knowledge, once spread globally, now shattered. The architect and philosopher Vitruvius hinted at it in his writings. The Vedic texts call it the Akashic memory. Medieval alchemists simply called it the root, a unified code underlying all human development, occasionally glimpsed, then buried, and always during moments of mass death. Moments when the veil thins, the black. Death was not just a medical event. It was a veil lifter. Across Europe, people began seeing strange symbols in the skies. Spirals of fire, wheels with eyes, horned lights. Chroniclers from Poland to Provence recorded these visions in illuminated margins, often painted over by later scribes. One even showed up in the Book of Hours kept at Lincoln. Cathedrals subtly hidden in the binding. Perhaps. The plague was not the cause of the disappearance. Perhaps it was the cover. Let's return again to those. Mutilated bones found in Warham Percy. Cut marks on necks, torsos, even skulls. Signs not of burial, but prevention. As though the dead might rise, or speak, or remember too much. Some anthropologists suggest it was a form of post-mortem punishment, tied to medieval fears of revenants. But what if it was a protocol, not based in superstition, but something passed down, warning from the past, garbled into religion, ritual, and fear? We'd like to think of history as linear, as progress. But what if it isn't? What if time folds? What if Warham Percy wasn't abandoned but looped out of chronology? What if those villagers just for a moment pierced the membrane between eras, between layers of consciousness, and saw what they weren't meant to? There's a reason you can stand in those ruins and feel watched. There's a reason no birds nest in the chapel beams. And maybe there's a reason why this story, this village, has never been taught in schools. Why its bones were quietly cataloged, then locked away. Why aerial surveys were funded, but never published. Because when you peel back the comfortable veil of plague and poverty, what lies beneath Warham Percy is not just a ruin. A question. One our ancestors were willing to die or disappear to protect. In the soft winds that sweep through Warham Percy's sunken lanes, there's a presence not loud, but unmistakable. It's a kind that prickles the back of your neck without cause. Some call it history, others call it memory. But perhaps what we feel, standing among the moss-covered stones and broken arches, is not the past echoing forward, but the future echoing back. Because here's the hardest truth of all. This village may not be unique. Across Britain and, indeed, across the world there are settlements like it. Villages removed from time, not destroyed by war, not consumed by natural disaster, but withdrawn, vanished. Often at the edge of trade routes, near ancient earthworks, burial mounds, or magnetic anomalies. Always just far enough from the center to escape notice, until they are gone. Take Dunwich, once a thriving port city on England's eastern coast. Today it's beneath the sea. Not just due to erosion, but according to some accounts, due to a great light seen off the coast in the 13th century. Records say the bells of Dunwich's submerged churches can still be heard on stormy nights. Romantic legend, perhaps. But the pattern holds. Places disappear, and with them, records, rituals, and realities. And maybe, just maybe, the disappearances are deliberate. Here's a theory, one rarely spoken aloud. What if these medieval villages were part of something larger? What if their locations weren't accidental but strategic? Nodes in a forgotten grid. Not for trade or governance, but for resonance, energy, communication with something. Other, a pre-modern network of consciousness. Now broken. It's not as far-fetched as it sounds in the 1970s. Researchers in the UK proposed the idea of the cognitive map, a shared neural web constructed over millennia by human habitation and ritual. Stone circles, ley lines, pilgrimage routes, cathedral alignments, they weren't random. They were part of an unconscious architecture, guiding humanity's spiritual and intellectual development like a tuning fork across the earth. But what happens when such a network fractures? Some say madness, others say silence. Wareham, Percy May. Be the grave marker of such a fracture. Consider this. The bones unearthed in the village display signs of trauma, not just physical but psychological. Deformed jawlines, consistent with chronic screaming, enamel erosion from long-term stress. Children born during the village's final decades show signs of hypoplasia, evidence of an environmental or emotional event so intense it permanently altered their growth. It is not just plague, it is terror embedded in the body, but terror of what? Perhaps the answer lies not in bones, but in words, in a letter preserved in the Vatican. Archives buried deep in the registers of Pope Clement. But there's a curious entry dated 1349. It references a heretical brotherhood near York who speak of the return. The return of what it doesn't say. It's only that they had contacted the stars through stone, and that their speech was not their own. The letter was unsigned. The attached parchment missing. Elsewhere, a Templar codex from the early 1300s references a voice beneath the nave. Again, no explanation. Only that the voice spoke in names, not words, and that those who heard it either died or stopped speaking altogether. These fragments, scattered across time, don't tell a single story, but together they hum with the same frequency. We've long assumed that medieval people were fearful and superstitious, prey for myth and panic. But what if they weren't naive, just more open? What if they retained a sensory capacity that we have dulled? The ability to perceive patterns we can no longer detect. Energies we can no longer name. Presences we've walled out with. Comfort, distraction, and electric light. It's possible, no. Likely that Wareham Percy's people encountered something ancient. Something left behind or waiting. Something that didn't fit inside the sanctioned world of church and crown. And so they tried to speak of it in murals, in carvings, in ritual. But that language was erased. Their bones scattered, their name reduced to a footnote. Because systems, then, as now fear, what they cannot categorize. We are told the medieval world was a dark age, but maybe it was just darkened. Intentionally. Perhaps we buried their knowledge because it burned too brightly. Perhaps these villagers didn't vanish because they failed to adapt, but because they remembered too much. Perhaps their ruin is not a cautionary tale, but a monument. A message carved in absence, and if so, then Wareham Percy is not just a mystery to be solved, it's a mirror. Because the questions they faced what lives beneath us, came before us. What watches through the Valar, not ancient, are modern, they are ours. And they are returning. Stand in the chapel ruins at dusk, feel the weight in the air. Listen, you may not hear birdsong, you may not hear wind, but if you wait long enough, you might hear something else. Not a sound. Knowing, and in that silence. If this opened a door in your mind, like it, share it, stay curious. Subscribe for what they never taught you.